Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to see you all here today. My name is Tim Vickers, and I work at the Center for Teaching and Learning. I see many familiar faces and a lot of new faces. I'm very happy to see you all here today. I just want to make a quick announcement and let you all know that we'll be web streaming this event. So if I kind of try to talk for the microphones or give a shout out to our colleagues who are joining us remotely, that's why. There'll be microphones placed up here, and we are videotaping it. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to our Dean of Arts and Sciences and our Executive Dean of Regional Higher Education, Dr. Robert Frank and Dr. Bill Willen. Cheers.
Okay, all right. So we're doing this with no net. Bill and I just decided that we would do this together because, in fact, we're jointly sponsoring this event, and I think we both believe very strongly that we want to build connections and collaboration across the Athens campus with the regional campuses. Right, Bill?
Absolutely. And this is the kind of activity that is central to what we do. Teaching, learning, improving our teaching and learning. So we're very pleased to be able to help sponsor this event today.
Yeah. I saw the title for the today's event, and I think this is a topic in teaching, teams, and technology as the three T's come together here. That's a fertile ground these days. There have been plenty of workshops and sessions about technology over the last few decades as technology has really come into the classroom in all its myriad ways. And as a matter of fact, probably all of us are familiar with teams, either from a student perspective of being part of a team, or maybe for some of you from a faculty perspective being part of a team that delivered instruction. And the typical response I remember as an instructor when I told students there was going to be some sort of team project were groans. And probably all of you have been in one of those teams, and you know the sorts of things that can go wrong. I know for myself that over my career, my approach to having students work in teams really changed quite a bit. And I think toward the end, I finally figured out ways to change students' attitudes about being involved in teams, and thought it was some of the most rewarding things I would do in a course. So I want to thank our...
I would love to thank the team that put this event together, Lori and Tim and our committee that worked so diligently. So very pleased to have this event streamed to the regional campuses where we have others joining us, and just great to be part of it.
Okay, we're done. I think, aren't we? We're done.
So thank you for the team welcome. That was excellent. I'm Laura Hatch, Associate Dean for Arts and Sciences, and I work closely with Bob Frank and really enjoy doing that. And it's been great to work with my colleague and friend, Tim Vickers, in planning this conference, and with other members of the SpotLight on Learning Planning Committee. So Lori Bauer, Director of Communications in the College of Arts and Sciences, Michael Lafreniere, Associate Professor and Program Coordinator for Environmental Engineering, Technology, Hazardous Materials Technology, Mathematics, and Chillicothe, Lauren McNeils, Assistant Chair, Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, Athens Campus, Kathleen Sullivan, Associate Professor of Political Science, Athens Campus, Kevin Uhaldi, Nexter, Associate Professor of History, Athens Campus, and Ping-Yuan Wang, who is the Assistant Professor of History in Lancaster. So the Planning Committee sent out a survey in the fall to request input for planning the conference, and over 100 faculty members at the university, Athens campus, and regional campuses provided very helpful input, converging on this theme of teaching, teams, and technology. We have a panel discussion and breakout sessions this morning on the topic of teaching with teams, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. And then in the afternoon, our sessions will be focusing on teaching with technology, innovative, pedagogically grounded uses of technology to promote student learning. And these will feature demos and discussions as well as our very own TED Talks, Technology and Education Talks. So this panel discussion that we're featuring this morning will focus on challenges and strategies for effective teamwork. Each panelist will speak for 5 to 10 minutes, focusing on challenges in teaching and working with teams related to their focal topic, and a strategy that they found useful in addressing those challenges. These topics, each of them will be followed up in the breakout sessions that will follow. So I would first like to introduce Nancy Teterick, Associate Professor of Anthropology, Athens campus, and she's going to be speaking about peer-led team learning. A special welcome to Catherine Marshall, volunteer and intern coordinator for Athens County Children's Services, who will be speaking about internship collaborations from the perspective of local agencies, service providers, how to make student internship collaborations really work. And then as a team member, Ping Yang Zhuang is going to be also speaking about internship collaborations from the perspective of the faculty member. So I'd also like to introduce Mark Labar, who is professor of philosophy. Actually, his table tents, I love this, Tim.
I do now.
I love this. I love this. I want this title. Professor of Professor. So Mark is Professor of Philosophy. I want that. Professor of Professors. Professor of Philosophy and also faculty member in the Scholars Program. And please, thank you so much for filling in for us. So, as a team member, so thank you so much. And so, perhaps we'll start, Nancy, would you mind just starting out and speaking for 5 to 10 minutes on your topic?
Sure. I will just give a little brief background. I know that there are some people here who have done peer-led team learning before, but maybe some of you haven't. And peer-led team learning, or PLTL, is a group-focused learning technique that was pioneered in mostly chemistry, biology, and math courses. And this is the first time that it's being used in a more social science-oriented course. I'm implementing it in my biological anthropology course, my intro course. And it's a system where if you have a large lecture section, that you then break out the larger lecture sections into smaller groups, and these smaller groups are problem-based and very much group-oriented, and they're led by a peer who has previously done well in the course in another section. And they don't have to be graduating seniors. It just so happens that my 5 this semester are graduating seniors, but they don't have to be. I think that's sort of up to you. And so the idea here is that you are taking the traditional lecture model and you're modifying it to give students a different way to learn course material. And in chemistry, and I talked a lot to Lauren McMills about this, in chemistry it's very much different because there's some prep for a national exam, and it's a little bit more problem-based or a little bit easier than I found it to be. So in my implementation, I had several challenges on 2 different levels, and maybe this is something the breakout group could talk a little bit more about. I was originally attracted to PLTL because I have a lab in biological anthropology that doesn't really get utilized very much, and I've got all these great materials, so I wanted the students in my introductory level course to be exposed to those. And so I started thinking about how to do that, and PLTL came across my radar. And the challenges have been on 2 levels. One, the challenge of sort of working in a group with the peer leaders and trying to get them organized and trying to how to teach them, essentially not to teach, but just to be leaders and how to interact in the classroom and do those sorts of things. And then also how to manage the actual small group sessions. So the challenges were actually on 2 different levels, and I found them both to be a little bit time consuming, but both really rewarding. I really enjoyed working with my peer leaders, and hopefully you'll get to meet some of them later this morning. They were very much into the process, and some of the things that I found challenging and rewarding were that they definitely took a lot more ownership over the course than I expected them to. I would often I constructed our weekly meetings as a collaborative team effort that I often presented, here's an idea of the material I want to cover or a problem I want to solve in the course. and then they would often take that and run with it in really unexpected ways, things I had no idea that was even possible to do. So I found that really challenging. Some of the other things I found really challenging was balancing the fact that in my course, about half the students were in PLTL and half of the students were not in PLTL, and trying to make sure that was not, being in PLTL was not an unfair advantage to the students not in that course, that it was fairly balanced in that sense. That was actually fairly challenging. The PLTL leaders helped with that a little bit. They would offer review sessions and for the whole class, so they kind of did that as a way to kind of balance that out a little bit, so they help with that. The other thing that I found difficult to balance that I don't know is the same in other courses, is that when my schedule would change due to the weather, or we spent more time on one topic or another, then that affected the problems that we had to do in the sessions. So I'm really looking forward to talking with people more about PLTL, and I can give a little bit more background maybe in the breakout session. I think it's a really unique model, and especially one that has not been used in social sciences really at all. As far as I can see, it's been used in chemistry and biology, and I think it's maybe a worthwhile thing for us to start exploring, those of us in the social sciences. I know that I've heard rumors, although I don't have the numbers, that supposedly some students enrolled in the PLTL sessions are now switching their major to anthropology. I didn't intend for it to be a recruitment tool, but apparently that's the rumor, so I think that it was really effective, but I'm looking forward to hearing what the PLTL leaders say and what everyone else kind of discusses in the breakout session. So.
Thank you. So, as Lori mentioned, my name is Catherine Marshall, and I'm the volunteer and intern manager for Athens County Children's Services. I've been in my current position for 2 years. That's when the position was actually created. Prior to that, other staff would oversee interns and a few volunteers, but we decided that we wanted to take a look at a bigger approach of bringing in volunteers to our agency, having more interns, and so the position was created, and that's what I've been doing. Now, prior to those 2 years, I did work with interns, but they were, assigned to my unit, so I worked with them in that capacity. Now I oversee them. I recruit interns, I do the interviews and place them at our agency. I then will supervise them, go and do check-ins. I try to check in every 2 weeks with them. I have an open door policy so they can really come at any time, but I try to do those official check-ins regularly. I also take part in the evaluations at the end of the semester or for midterm. And we take interns that are doing mandatory internships and also non-mandatory internships. We have interns from a variety of majors. Since I've been there, we've worked with students from social work, child and family studies, women and gender studies, criminology and sociology, psychology. Then we have health public relations. We're getting an HR intern. So we place them throughout the agency in a variety of different positions. The expectations are different from each college, and also if it's a mandatory or a non-mandatory internship. So that's something that one of the things I'm looking at next year is having some more uniformity throughout the internships. So one of the things I'll be talking about in the breakout session is just kind of my plans for next year in terms of contracts from my end, not adding a lot of work to them, but also making them accountable for these are the hours you say you're going to be there, making sure I have a contact at the university, because that's been one of the challenges I've had is when I have an issue or a concern with one of the students, not being able to contact someone at the university to address that. And another thing that I'm going to be changing for next year is the hours. I started out with the assumption that, these are young adults and they can be responsible for their hours, but I think I need to check up on that a little more next year. That's something that this year I have a student that when I would check in with her would say, oh, I'm doing great, my hours are good. And then later when talking to the staff she was working with, there's absolutely no way her hours could have been good. And she continuously tells me the same story that, oh, no, they're fine. So next year they're going to have to turn in their hours to me every 2 weeks when we meet regularly. And so those are some of the challenges that I have encountered working with these students. And for the most part, it's been very, very positive. And but I'm just going to tweak a few things to make it a better program. So I work directly with the interns at the that come to Children's Services. I work with the staff and the different units that I place them with, and then I do work with the university as well. I go to internship fairs. I talk to some of the departments at the university we have closer contact with, and so I meet regularly with them. They do site visits once or twice a semester, which has been very helpful, just to kind of check in. If there are any issues, we can address it right there. And during the internship, we are hoping that our students will gain, some real-world experience, get a level of comfort with issues that they may not have realize that they have, or just with the profession. You hear about it in class, and that's one thing a lot of the students tell me, we hear about this in class, but then when you actually get hands-on, when you meet the children, when you meet the families, when you go in the homes, it's a whole different world. Actually, during our interview, I tried to prep them in a little bit about the home environment that they may go into, and they are like, yes, I can do that, and I've been in some dirty homes or some negative situations, but until you actually go into the homes that we go into, you really have no idea, and it's a learning experience for them. And then, we come back after they do their shadowing, they come back and we'll kind of debrief about it. We'll talk about things that were difficult for them. We'll talk about things that could be beneficial for them to overcome it. I'll just admit, I myself am kind of a bug and germaphobe, but I did home visits for 10 years and I loved it. And so we talk about some of the issues that I had and how I overcame them. And then I also have found that a lot of the students don't have a lot of experience in a business setting. And so we also are trying to teach them the protocol of how to get things done at an agency, and professional development, things about cell phone use is a big one, and inappropriate computer use at work. And so, dress code, even though, we touch on those things, those are issues that I have to go back and touch on again as the semester progresses. So, as I said, in the breakout session, I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the internship program that we have at our agency, some of the challenges that I've had, and in terms of changes, a lot of them I'm going to be making next year. I've made a few changes from last year to this year, is where I implemented meeting with them every 2 weeks, because I had students that near the end of the semester were saying, well, I didn't get this experience, or this didn't, work out for me. And so now I meet with them regularly and I ask them, what's going well for you? What are some concerns? What would you like to see more of? And so I'm getting that information and feedback throughout the whole semester so I can change it. So.
Okay. Well, I'm Pingwen Wang. I teach on the Lancaster campus. I'm in history. So I'm going to talk about, just very briefly, a specific course that we offer on the Lancaster campus, which is History Internship, History 4910. This is a course on the history catalog, but it was implemented locally in Lancaster about 2 years ago in the winter term in 2012. And this is an elective course, so this is on a voluntary basis. Students are not required to take it. And this course is for advanced history majors, or students from other majors to gain hands-on experience in doing history-related work in public and private nonprofit organizations. But they have to do history-related work. They can't just go there and file papers or carry boxes from one building to another or answering phones. Those are not history-related. In the end, students would receive between 1 to 4 credit hours, depending on how many hours cumulatively they work per semester. So, it's so 1 credit for every 25 hours of work in a semester. So this course was actually discovered by my colleague, Dr. Mark Nevin, during the Q2S transition. He found, he saw this course on the catalog and he wanted to implement it on our campus. And so there was a brief process of kind of getting clearance and approval from the home campus here in Athens, and we got it started in winter of 2012. So really, it's Dr. Nevin who calls the organizations, mostly in Lancaster, a couple in Athens, and a couple in Columbus. Most of them are museums and historical societies. But to date, we have about, altogether, maybe about 10, 11 student interns, and all of them, when they were officially enrolled in this course, they interned at the Fairfield Heritage Association, the FHA. I want to talk a little bit about the process and then a bit of evaluation of this course. So this is a credit or no credit permission-only course. So to get it started, during the enrollment period, the students, they have to reach out to the organizations. We provide them with a list of organizations, and they will reach out to them. And with the FHA, they fill out an application. And then once they are approved for the internship, the FHA director sends us a letter of approval, and with very clear descriptions of their tasks and the work hours and the objectives for the individual interns, and then we would sign a permission slip for the student. When I'm supervising it, I ask students to turn in a short status report every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks, and then at the end of the semester, in order to receive credit, the internship supervisor in the organization would write a final review, a final evaluation, and the student intern would also submit a final report. 2 to 3 pages of report, and then I will look at evaluations, and then I will assign credit. I think overall there has been so much more reward than challenge, that I'm really glad that I'm on the faculty side of the internship, because as a faculty supervisor, it's not a very time demanding course. I do have to check in on the student every once in a while, especially if I have 2 or 3 at a time. I have to kind of keep a track on their work. When I first started supervising it, well, Dr. Nevin and I take turns supervising it, but I only do it in the spring. He sometimes offers in the summer. In my first term supervising it, I had a kind of a bumpy start because the student never officially registered for it because he didn't turn in his permission slip until close to the end of the quarter. But he had already worked there for the hours, so we figured out a way for him to register late. And then that particular student also had a little bit of trouble keeping his hours and be consistent, in showing up at work. And at that time, the FHA was also stretched pretty thin with their managerial personnel, so the office manager just, wasn't really updating me on the student's performance either. But in the end, the student, in his report, he said that this was a totally rewarding experience. He wished more students on our campus would know about this opportunity and would take this same course. He actually stayed as a volunteer throughout the summer at FHA. So I think that's really a positive outcome of this internship course. Excuse me. The FHA hired a new executive director in the fall of 2012, and from then on, everything became much more institutionalized. At the breakout session, I'll show you a few documents generated by the FHA and some of the reports and evaluations submitted to me and to Dr. Nevin in the past 2 years. From the student side, I think students love it. A lot of them actually continued on as volunteers at the FHA, and one student actually got a part-time job at the organization, and another student got a full-time job at a different organization because of her experience at the FHA. And also, Mark and I were able to further collaborate with the FHA and sort of integrate partially the internship into our curriculum. For example, when I taught the J course, historical research and writing, because a lot of my students in that class had internship experiences at the FHA, I took the class to the FHA and encouraged them to use the materials and archives there for their research projects. And one student did that. She interned there. She was familiar with the materials to begin with, and then she wrote her research paper on, using FHA materials, and then she published an article in the Fairfield Heritage Quarterly. So that, she makes us look good, through this internship collaboration experience. And finally, my colleague Mark Nevin will be hosting or co-hosting a Civil War symposium at the FHA, and he's turning that two-day event into a special course. So that, even furthers our collaboration with the FHA. So I think, all around for the students, they gain hands-on experience. They learned the kind of behind-the-scene workings of museums and historical societies. They realize that sometimes you just have to do really tedious work in order to produce some, research outcomes. And for us, on the faculty side, we are really looking forward to integrating more and more of the internship course into the curriculum. And I think overall, this program also contributed to our campus's mission, which is to tie the campus and community together and to make students more aware of their roles in their own communities. So that's my presentation.
Thank you, and looking forward to the breakout sessions that will go into more detail and provide some of the generalizable sorts of conclusions that you've drawn, and I'm looking forward to some of the documentation that you've developed to help promote really effective student learning internships. So thank you so much. And also for the PLTL, the peer-led team learning and internship opportunities are two of the high-impact practices that really help to promote student learning, along with interdisciplinary courses in team teaching. And Mark LeVar, in addition to his position as professor of professors, is also a faculty member in the Scholars Program. And maybe you could say a little bit about the Scholars Program before talking about interdisciplinary course design and team teaching.
Sure. Yeah, this is off the cuff, so I apologize in advance if this ends up being a little bit sketchy. The Scholars Program was begun, I guess the roots of it were some maybe 10 years ago or so, by a number of faculty that apprehended a need for recruiting students that were really interested in ideas and in challenging reading and in intensive writing. So the course was originally, the year we kicked it off, I think, was 2007, 2008, or 2008, 2009, something like that. And the idea was we read original works, no secondary works, no textbooks, no nothing else, starting with the ancient period in the fall, the medieval period, and this was still on quarters in the winter quarter, and then the spring quarter in the modern period. And each of those, after the first year, was team taught by a couple of faculty from different departments. And the Scholars Program then transitioned when we went from quarters to semesters. We had to reconceive the architecture of it because we no longer had the three-quarter division. And we changed it to being sort of still a general intensive primary sources, writing intensive course in the fall, coupled with sort of an introduction to scholarship in the spring, where we invite faculty from different departments to come in and give talks in their areas, sort of whatever they like, and as a professional talk, right? There's not a reading in advance, there's not writing assignments, it's engaging with scholars, doing scholarship, and that's the form that the Scholars Program exists now. So my experience with them, I taught in the Scholars Program for all but one of the years of its existence. 1 year I taught with Kevin Uhalde, which was a great experience, and for the last 3 years I've taught with Corey Crawford, which has also been a great experience. In trying to think about how to talk about the team teaching for that, it strikes me that it's really difficult for me to break out what of the challenges pertain to team teaching per se, and what of the challenges pertain to its interdisciplinary and indeed sort of open natured, open textured operation. So the Scholars Program from the start was intended to be sort of open-ended, right? There's not a syllabus for scholars because it doesn't exist, and we're sort of, from the beginning, been finding our way as we're undertaking the class. But then I recall I actually did teach an a team-taught philosophy class some years before. I taught environmental ethics for several years, and we had a visiting biologist who was here, and she and I team-taught that. And that was a philosophy course, knew what the syllabus was. We, in fact, she was one of the co-authors of the textbook, so the text was pretty obvious. And I'm thinking the challenges for that were much more defined than the challenges for the interdisciplinary team teaching. It's been much more work, partly just because the task isn't really well defined in advance. And so what we've wanted to do each year, what we've had to do each year, is think what we wanted the course to be. What did we want? I mean, we knew within rough outlines we wanted students reading primary texts. We wanted them doing a lot of writing. We wanted them, the other sort of mega interdisciplinary aspect of scholars is that Corey and I, or Kevin and I, taught only a small percentage, did only a small percentage of the lectures. The courses were built so that each week there was a lecture, and then a couple of discussion sections, and then a writing section, typically. And we did only a couple of lectures each term, and for the rest, we recruited other willing, generous faculty to come and give talks on works that they were interested in, had expertise in, wanted to talk about. So I have to say, apart from the work part of this, the great benefit, which I've systematically suppressed on any recording that I've done of the work that goes into this class, the great benefit is getting to hear from all these wonderful people about texts that I would never read, probably, period, certainly not in philosophy, and then get to hear people who really knew what they were talking about talk about these things. That's the great benefit to me of doing team teaching, I think in general, or interdisciplinary teaching in particular. So we had to design these courses so that we had a sense for the readings that we wanted, that we're going to be covering, the terrain that we wanted to cover, and also thinking about who we could ask, or more particularly who we could get to give lectures for us. And it was different every time, right? So we ran the course. I guess it's been running now 6 years. It's been different every year that we've offered it. It's changing again this fall. Tom Scanlon and Julie White will be running it this fall, and it's going to be different yet again. So some of the challenges I think that pertain to the team part is that if I were just sort of set loose on this interdisciplinary thing, I would have had my ideas. But I had actually Corey as a collaborator for the last 3 years, and the two of us also worked with Dave Wanzik from English. Dave really masterminded the writing part of the course and did an enormous amount of work in teaching and tutoring writing in it. And Dave had his own ideas as to content, and they were good ideas. So effectively, the three of us ended up having to think about, within the broad sort of range of the goals of the class, what texts were we going to use, what people were we going to ask, how are we going to sequence these. And I think the key to me is finding really congenial collaborators, because I was very lucky to work with Corey and Dave. And on most of the in fact, I can't think that there was ever a big issue that we didn't either start out in rough agreement or end up pretty willingly in consensus as to what we wanted to do. We had differing ideas as to emphases and so forth, but we started early thinking about what we wanted to do, getting texts lined up. That always seemed like it took way longer than it would if I were just doing text myself. But on the other hand, it had the benefit of ideas from a wider range of sources. In operating the class, the other thing the one general sort of experience that I had from thinking about the collaborative element of teaching was, I think we learned to front load as much of the work as we possibly could. So summer's really a great time for brainstorming and blue sky thinking about the course and trying to anticipate things. In the middle of October, when you've got other classes going on, your collaborators have other classes going on, you're on the fly, that's a really hard time to be trying to think through how you want to solve big problems. So as time went on, I think we've got better at front loading and trying to solve up front as many problems as we could. But as in the operation of any course, there are surprises. Students find innovative ways to go off the rails in various ways that you have to cope with. And I don't think there's any shortcut there besides having people that agree. For us, I think the key was we were in sync on the broad goals of the course. We all had, I think, pretty similar ideas of what was going to count as success and what was going to count as failure. And so having those sort of anchors in place, it was pretty easy to hash out the places where we had differing viewpoints, whether it was in grading. We all had different grading methods, so we had to sync up grading, and in problem solving throughout. As I said, the key is getting people that are really smart and really easy to work with, and that makes the job pretty easy. So I stop there. Is that?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. So we have time now for some questions and discussion. I thought I want to start things off and just ask perhaps each of you if you could share one tip that you think would be helpful for faculty contemplating the kind of work that you've been doing. So, like, one tip, one strategy. Catherine, could you get us started? What's one tip for a faculty member that you think would be really helpful for internships?
I think that either having a site visit once a semester, if possible, is helpful, or else doing a formal check-in. So whether it's by email or phone, just so we have some sort of communication, and if there are any issues, we can address them at that point, or if there's anything positive that stands out that I need to share, that would be a good time to do that as well.
Thank you.
I would say that sometimes my interns would encounter situations where a director is not quite sure what he or she wants, and then so there would be like conflicting information. And so I think from the faculty's perspective, I might keep a closer contact with the internship directors, and just to make sure that they and the students are on the same page, so it's easier to manage all of them.
So do you do things and put things in writing then? Do you recommend putting things in writing in terms of the expectations?
No, I think a personal sort of report might work a little better, like on a local level. Yeah.
I guess I kind of have two. The first one, which really helped me, is to find someone else who's done this before. I talked to Lauren McMills, and it was really, really helpful. I think that's probably been a huge key for me. And then also finding peer leaders that are enthusiastic and are willing to do just about anything for the course and for the peer leading has really been the key. If you have someone who's not very into it, then that's really going to cause some problems. I had some of the peer leader sections were kind of small and some were a lot larger, and that created some different challenges for them, and they were really willing to help each other work it out because they were all really equally invested in it. And so I think that was a really big key part of it. So those, I guess that you get a 2-for-1 tip there.
I think in addition to making sure that you agree on, that you're in agreement on what's going to count as success for the class, so what you're trying to accomplish with it, that seems to me really important. But the other sort of practical thing would be getting as much as you can out in writing. So I think when I said we began to front load things, I think we much more self-consciously began writing stuff out or making sure that we had it written out in advance. Because you sort of know, if you're running your own class, you sort of know what you're thinking about grading and assignments and requirements and stuff like that. And obviously we try to make that as explicit as we can for our students, but there's still a lot of implicit expectation that students are used to reading off us. And then you get with another faculty member who's used to working in a different mode, and a lot of those implicit expectations don't necessarily jibe. So we did better, I think, the more that we committed to getting our expectations of the students and classes and timing and grading and everything else down in writing, and making sure that they're explicit in that way. So I would say that would be a really important practical thing.
Great, thank you. So we have time for questions, comments, discussion. Please. Kathleen?
Nancy, I have a question about your peer leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Are they signing up for course credit? Is there a peer leader course, or how does
So,
that help work?
thank you, Kathleen. I think that was something that I debated about, and I think actually I will have them do that. They are not this time signing up for a course credit. They're actually getting paid, not a lot, but they're getting paid. And I went back and forth about that, and I kind of thought, how do I want to structure that? And I followed some other models here on campus and nationally, but in the end, I think we had only 1 hour. They worked 5 hours a week, and we only had 1 hour to meet together. And I really think that we could have used more time to do that. So I think that actually would have been helpful had they been enrolled in a separate course, and then we had extra time to meet, because they really kind of got involved much more in terms of thinking about class problems and students and classroom presentation and just all the things that I never really expected. So I think that I will eventually do that. But that was something I had to try to figure out if I wanted which way to go. So thank you.
Question from how do we evaluate the learning? And also, how do we evaluate teaching?
How did we evaluate? Sorry. We wanted the class to be writing intensive, so we had a couple of different, we have had, I should say, a couple of different writing assignments that we require that they do. They do term papers, and we wanted them to go through an explicit process of revision, editing. In some cases, we incorporated peer review of drafts of papers and so forth. And we tried to give, I don't know how successfully, we tried to give some credit for each of those stages as opposed to just assigning a grade to the paper at the end. So we wanted to see them, and we wanted to ascribe weight to the comments that they gave to their peers, and to drafts, and to having thesis statements done when we wanted that done, and so forth. The other intensive writing thing that we did that I think in hindsight actually turned out to be really good for student writing development was we have them write every week on the lectures that they were hearing. Short, we confine them to 300 words, which, as you might imagine, they first think, oh, how am I going to come up with 300 words? And then after they do it a couple times, they realize, how am I going to limit this to 300 words? Which made it manageable grading-wise. But we really looked for and sort of consistently beat on them to be thinking thematically about their essays, not just about the lecture, but to presenting their ideas in some way that was thematized. So I think part of what we were doing was trying to reinforce their aspiration to think thematically about, and in some way systematically, about texts that are very different, lectures that are very different. So I'm not sure how, I don't even know if this is exactly answering your question. This is what we were after, this is what we were trying to do with our evaluations of their writing, was to have a consistent expectation, despite the inputs, that the output was going to be an essay of either 300 words or 1,200 or 1,500 words, whatever the paper was, that was clearly thematized and that did a good job of, I'm a philosopher, I like arguments. So that's where they did a clear job of assembling the evidence or the argument or the premises for the conclusions that they were trying to draw. The other thing that we did, I was worried, and I think Corey was concerned also, that his grading would be, his standards would be different than mine. We were somewhat worried about discontinuities there. It worked out really well that we had a third reader, Dave Wanzik, who shared the grading with us. So I didn't read any of the work of Corey's students. He didn't read any of my students, but Dave read both. And so when we would, and typically we would split assignments, so that, especially early on in the term, we'd split assignments. Dave would take half and I'd take half, and then I'd say, okay, here are my 3 top, here are my 3 bottom. You send me the same, and we would sort of calibrate. And Dave was doing that with Corey also. So I think, it's impossible to know how ideally we realized the aim of having roughly equal expectations, but I think we did a credible job of doing it, and I don't think we've ever heard, a lot of the students that were in different sections were friends with each other, and we have not gotten, I think, any feedback at any time that one of these sections was, just ridiculously harder grading than the other or anything like that. So I think to some degree we did succeed in calibrating, but a lot of it was because we were looking at each other's grading.
How you invite the student contribute to this evaluation?
How did we get
the invited speaker, you guys.
They did, right. So that's a great question. The answer is 0. It was hard getting people's time is scarce. We felt people were being generous just to come and give us a prepared lecture. So we didn't require that they be involved in the evaluation at all. And that, both for the sake of recruiting faculty to give us talks, but I think also for the sake of having some degree of control on the evaluation. That really would have been a huge heterogeneity to try to manage, I think.
It's also important to remember that we had, so the speaker would come, but Mark and I would lead discussions on either side of the speaker, right? So there was that kind of continuity. Yeah. It wasn't just that somebody came in and lectured and then they wrote their papers and that was it. So that was how we tried to maintain continuity.
And that was really riveted in the text too. So it's the speaker and the text and yeah.
So was this a situation that then all 3 be in the classroom, or was there like one day that you would be there and one day that you would be there so you could split up the load?
We're all there for the lecture, and then the discussions were broken out. So very occasionally we would sit in on each other's discussions. And Dave was present. Dave was actually the only common thread to just about everything. Corey and I were really running our discussion sessions. Dave would sit in on those, then he would typically run the writing workshop.
We would circulate this sort of discussion questions among us, and especially when they were texts that neither of us knew anything about. We would, email, okay, what are you gonna ask, and that was really helpful and really enjoyable to sort of get other people's takes on the material, and I think it helped also maintain a certain kind of community and continuity with the material,
as well as alleviating panic.
Yeah.
Reading really foreign texts.
Thank you. So I have a question for Nancy. How did the roles of the peer team leaders get decided?
Oh, so how did I select them?
And then like how did you decide what they would be doing precisely?
Okay, so I went through an application and hiring process where I kind of disseminated it to majors and non-majors. I didn't do very targeted this time, but I think I might for next time. But I had a really good response in terms of applications, and so they went through an interview and hiring process on that end. And then in terms of figuring out what the peer leaders would be doing each week, each peer leader had a section of students that they were solely responsible for. And every week we would say, this is the course material, and I would have a suggestion for a problem or a topic that I thought we wanted to work through that would enhance what was in lecture. And then we would kind of discuss amongst ourselves collaboratively to figure out what direction we thought would be the best one to go in, and we can talk more in the breakout session. Sometimes that was successful and sometimes it wasn't. And then the peer leaders, we kind of went through the exercise together to talk about what the peer leaders were supposed to do and what they weren't supposed to do. The idea behind peer-led team learning is that the peer leaders are supposed to help the group students work through the problem. They're not supposed to give them the answers. They're not supposed to stand up there and lecture. They're not supposed to be in the role of an instructor. They're simply there to assist through the problem-solving process. Now, if you really want to be honest, I think that probably wasn't always true. I think that they kind of took so much ownership that they kind of did their own thing sometimes, and I could see Lauren nodding. So, which I actually really liked. I thought that actually what caused that to happen, which was a really unexpected benefit for me, is it actually changed the dynamic in the larger lecture group. It completely altered how that classroom functioned. So even though I originally had them as a really prescribed role in terms of they're supposed to be guiding the students through these exercises, I was really happy that that's not what they did. But each week we came up with some ideas, and I have a couple of examples to show you. Honestly, I made up some myself. Some I stole from the internet and just gave the person credit for, especially when I was kind of desperate at the end of the semester with the time changes due to the weather and the way that the course had gone. So I kind of, it was a different strategies, a collaboration with the peer leaders, looking on the internet, kind of my own goals. I had started off with a list of ideas that I ultimately used some of, and some of I didn't use. So.
What was the ratio to how many students maximum?
Thank you. That's a really good question. I didn't say that. Ideally speaking, I think the peer leader groups are supposed to be kind of small, like around 8. We had 2 that were 10 and 11. Then we had one, which was my actually favorite one, which had 1 student in it. And happily, she was an anthropology major, so she basically got 15 weeks of tutorial in anthropology. So they were quite varied in their size. And I sort of let that go this semester because I really wanted to get the system up and running, and I wanted to get the peer leaders kind of embedded in that system. So ideally, I think it'd be around 8. I have a max right now set at 15, but ideally it should be a little bit smaller than that. And ideally, obviously, it'd be more than 1. But there's some other challenges kind of inherent in that, why that happened, that I could talk about in the great breakout session.
So we have time for one more question, please.
Okay, logistically, what dictated those peer group sizes? Were they scheduled at different times?
Yes.
Classrooms, or what?
That actually was one of the biggest challenges I went through, is to try to schedule the 1 hour or 55-minute peer-led team learning sections at times when students would want to sign up for them. So apparently, unbeknownst to me, 10 a.m. on a Friday is too early. And that's the class that had 1 student in it. So I thought 10 a.m., being kind of naive, I thought 10 was good. And interestingly, the Thursday classes were the bigger classes. So I went back and I had looked at chemistry, and I had looked at what other people were doing, and I kind of talked to the peer leaders, and so I've changed it a little bit. That actually is a big challenge, figuring out, and I think some of the Friday sections overlap with language courses that run through Fridays. So I think that it wasn't dictated by anything other than me trying to maximize enrollment, and clearly I was not successful at that the whole time. So.
Thank you. So one of the themes that I'm hearing is the importance of developing clear expectations, and at the same time being flexible with your team members and developing those expectations. Each of those topics are going to be followed up in our breakout sessions to come. I just want to mention a few things about the rest of the conference today. So after the breakout sessions, those will end at 12:15. We have time for lunch and informal networking that will take place in the Faculty Commons open area. And at 12:50, and just come back here for our TED Talks, Technology and Education Talks. There will be 3 10-minute talks about technology and education ideas we're sharing. And then in the afternoon, 1:35 to 3 p.m., there will be a series of 3 concurrent sessions featuring 5 different technology and education demos and discussions, and you can see those listed on the program. So for the breakout sessions, the interdisciplinary course design and team teaching will be here after. Just feel free to take a break. There's coffee and tea and some snacks in the Faculty Commons. So the interdisciplinary course design and team teaching will be led by Mark LeVar and also Corey Crawford, who also participated a bit in our discussion. Thank you. Assistant Professor of Classics and World Religions, and also a faculty member in the Scholars Program. I also see Tom Scanlon, who's a faculty member in the Scholars Program and my predecessor as Associate Dean in the college. So really glad that Tom is here today. Anyone else from the Scholars Program that I haven't mentioned? Okay, great. Student internship collaborations will be in the Faculty Commons. 301E, which is one of the FAR rooms, and then peer-led team learning will feature Nancy with 5 of her student peer leaders in 301U. So please take a break, and we'll reconvene for the breakout sessions. Thank you.